They thought I wouldn't find out. They planned everything without me. A whole family meeting behind my back. But what they didn't know was, I was already standing at the door when they started talking. I didn't push it open. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there, listening, and the moment I heard my name, I knew this wasn't just a conversation. This was something else, something deliberate, something planned. The house felt different that evening. Too quiet in the wrong places, and too loud where it shouldn't have been. I had gone out earlier, just a quick errand, nothing serious. But something told me to come back sooner than I planned. Call it instinct, call it experience. Either way, I listened. As I stepped onto the porch, I heard voices from inside. Not normal talking, not casual conversation. It was focused, low, careful, like people who didn't want to be overheard. I reached for the door handle, then stopped, because I heard my son's voice, clear, firm, and then my daughter-in-law, then my younger sister, all in the same room, without me. That alone was enough to raise questions. But what came next? That's what made me stay still. He needs to decide tonight, my son said. There was a pause, then my sister's voice. She's not going to agree if we tell her everything. Silence followed, the kind of silence that confirms something without saying it out loud. I felt something shift in my chest. Not a shock, not yet. Something deeper. Recognition, because I had lived long enough to understand that tone. That careful way people speak when they've already made a decision, and now they're just figuring out how to justify it. I leaned slightly closer to the door, not enough to be noticed, just enough to hear clearly. We can't keep dragging this out, my daughter-in-law said. It's already affecting everything. Then we handle it tonight, my son replied. Handle what? That question sat heavy in my mind, because no one had told me anything. No conversation, no warning, no respect, just a meeting without me, about something that clearly involved me. And in that moment, I understood something very clearly. This wasn't about discussion. This was about control. They had already talked, already decided, already agreed. And I was the last one they planned to inform. If they planned to inform me at all, I could have walked in right then. I could have interrupted them, demanded answers. But I didn't. Because when people think you're not listening, they reveal everything. So I stayed exactly where I was, still, quiet, listening to every word, trying to piece together what they thought they could hide. Then my sister spoke again, and this time, her voice was softer, careful. She's going to feel betrayed. That word landed heavier than anything else. Betrayed, not misunderstood, not confused. Betrayed. That told me everything I needed to know. Whatever they were planning, they knew it would hurt me, and they were doing it anyway. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I needed to stay steady, because the next thing I did was going to matter a lot. I opened my eyes again. The voices inside continued. Plans, timelines, decisions, all made without me. And right then, standing at that door, I made a decision of my own. If they thought they could sit in that room, talk about me, plan my life, without including me, they had forgotten one thing. I was not someone you move around quietly. I was not someone you push aside, and I was definitely not someone who walks away when things don't feel right. So I placed my hand firmly on the door handle, took a slow breath, and prepared to walk into a conversation they never intended for me to hear. I didn't rush in. I didn't swing the door open like someone looking for a fight. I turned the handle slowly and stepped inside like I belonged there. Because I did. The room went silent, not gradually, not awkwardly, completely. Three faces turned toward me at the same time. My son, my daughter-in-law, my sister, and at that moment, I saw it clearly. Not confusion, not surprising, guilt, the kind that shows up before anyone says a word. I closed the door gently behind me. No noise, no drama, just enough to let them know I wasn't leaving. I didn't realize there was a meeting tonight, I said. My voice was calm, too calm for what they were expecting. No one answered immediately. They looked at each other first. Always a bad sign, because when people need to check each other before speaking, it means the truth is already complicated. It's not what it looks like, my daughter-in-law said quickly. That sentence alone told me everything, because no one says that when things are simple. I looked at her, then my son, then my sister, one by one, giving each of them a moment to speak, to explain, to say something that made sense. But no one did. So I walked further into the room, slow steps, controlled. I didn't sit down. I stayed standing. Because this wasn't a casual conversation. This was something they had prepared for. So, I said, what exactly doesn't it look like? My son exhaled like he had been holding his breath. He stepped forward slightly, trying to take control of the moment. We were just talking about some things, he said. Important things. I nodded once. Important enough to leave me out of? That landed. I could see it in his face. He didn't expect me to say it like that. Direct, clear, no space to hide. It wasn't like that, my sister added, her tone softer now, careful, measured. The same tone she used when she knew she was walking on thin ground. I turned to her. It sounds exactly like that. Another silence, heavier this time, because now they knew I wasn't confused. I wasn't guessing. I knew. Not everything, but enough. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms slightly, defensive, subtle, but visible. We were going to talk to you, she said. When? That question came faster than she expected, and she didn't answer right away. Because there wasn't a good answer. My son stepped in again. We just needed to figure things out first. That word again. We, not me, not us. We, a group, a decision is already forming, and I wasn't part of it. I took another step forward, close enough now that they couldn't avoid eye contact. Figure out what? No one spoke, and that's when I noticed something else. The table, papers, documents, not scattered, organized, placed deliberately. This wasn't a conversation that just happened. This was planned, prepared, structured. I reached out and picked up one of the papers. No one stopped me. That told me more than anything. If it was nothing, they would have taken it from me. But they didn't. Because it was something. Something they didn't want me to see, but knew they couldn't hide anymore. I glanced down, then back up. And that's when I saw it. The shift. The moment they realized this wasn't going to go the way they planned. Because I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't waiting to be included. I was already in the room, already holding the truth they tried to keep from me. And now, they had no control over how this conversation would go next. I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence sit. Because sometimes, silence makes people reveal more than questions ever could. The paper in my hand felt heavier than it should have, not because of what it weighed, but because of what it meant. I looked down again, slowly this time, reading every line, every word, making sure I understood exactly what they had been planning, without me. And the more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't a discussion. This was a decision, already made, already agreed on. All they were missing was how to tell me. I let out a quiet breath, not dramatic, not loud, just enough to steady myself. Then I placed the paper back on the table, carefully, like I wasn't about to let it shake me, even though it had already tried. So this is what you've been working on, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't break. It stayed exactly where it needed to be, controlled. That seemed to unsettle them more than anything else. My son shifted his weight. My daughter-in-law looked down briefly. My sister avoided my eyes completely. That told me everything I needed to know. You were going to sell it, I continued. There it was. The truth, out loud. No one corrected me. No one denied it. Because they couldn't. It's not just about that, my son said quickly, trying to soften it. But once something is said clearly, it can't be undone. I turned to him. Then explain what it's about. He hesitated, not because he didn't have words, but because he didn't know which version of the truth to use, the softened one, or the real one. My daughter-in-law stepped in again. We were thinking long term, she said. We just want what's best for everyone. Everyone. That word again. And still, I wasn't included in it. I nodded slowly. And who decided what's best for me? That question landed harder than the others. Because this time, there was no easy way around it. My sister finally spoke. We were trying to help. I looked at her, really looked at her. Because of everyone in that room, she was the one I didn't expect. You call this helping? My voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it now. Not anger, something sharper, clarity. She swallowed slightly before answering. We didn't want to upset you. I let out a quiet, almost breath-like laugh. By making decisions behind my back, that hit exactly where it needed to. No one moved. No one interrupted. Because now, they could feel it. The shift. The moment where this stopped being their conversation and became mine. I walked around the table slowly, taking in everything. The documents, the notes, the quiet tension hanging in the air. You planned this, I said. Not a question, a statement. And again, no one denied it. My son finally stepped closer. We were going to include you, he said, after we figured everything out. I turned to face him fully now. And what exactly was left for me to decide? That question stayed in the room, heavy, unanswered. Because the truth was simple. Nothing. They had already decided everything. The timing, the outcome, the next step, all of it. and I was just supposed to agree, accept it, move along, like I had no say in my own life. I folded my arms slowly, not defensive, just steady, grounded. You sat here, I said quietly, and planned something that affects me without even giving me the respect of being part of it. My daughter-in-law opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, because there was nothing she could say that would make that sound better. My sister shifted uncomfortably. My son looked like he wanted to fix it, but I didn't know how. And that's when I realized something important. They weren't just hoping I wouldn't find out. They were counting on me to stay quiet, to accept it, to go along with it, like I always had before. But this time, they miscalculated, because I wasn't confused, I wasn't emotional, and I wasn't backing down. I stepped closer to the table again, placed my hand on the documents, and looked at all three of them, one after the other. You should have told me. Simple, direct, final. And in that moment, they understood something they hadn't considered before. This wasn't going to be easy. Not for them. Not anymore. No one spoke after that. Not immediately. Because there are moments when the truth lands so clearly, people don't know how to respond to it. I stayed where I was, hand resting lightly on the table, not gripping, not tense, just a present. Because I wasn't there to argue. I was there to understand exactly how far this had gone. My son finally broke the silence. We didn't think you'd agree, he said. And just like that, everything became even clearer. I looked at him, not surprised, not even hurt at that moment, just focused. So you decided for me. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence confirmed it. My daughter-in-law shifted slightly, her arms still crossed, but tighter now. We were trying to avoid conflict, she added. That word again. Avoid. I nodded slowly. By creating it instead. That landed exactly where it needed to, because now there was no way to pretend this had been handled well. My sister finally looked at me again. You've been under a lot of pressure, she said carefully. We thought this would make things easier. I held her gaze, long enough for her to feel it. Easier for who? She didn't respond, because she couldn't. This wasn't about making anything easier for me. This was about making something simpler for them. Faster, more controlled, less complicated, without my voice in it. I straightened slightly and stepped away from the table, creating space. Not because I was stepping back, but because I was stepping into something else. Clarity. Because now I wasn't trying to figure out what they did. I already knew. Now I understand why. And why was just as important. You didn't trust me to be part of this, I said. My tone is steady, even, no accusation, just the truth. My son exhaled again, slower this time. It's not about trust, he replied, and that's when I shook my head slightly. Then what is it about? He hesitated, and that hesitation said more than anything else, because when people can't name it, it usually means they don't want to admit it. My daughter-in-law stepped forward this time. We just didn't want things to get complicated, she said. I looked at her, really looked at her, because now the pattern was complete. Control, convenience, silence. They removed me from the situation because I made it harder, because I asked questions, because I didn't just agree. And that was the problem, not the situation. Me. I let that settle for a moment, not reacting, just letting it be exactly what it was. Then I nodded once. Small, controlled. So, instead of including me, I said, you decided to move forward without me. No one corrected me, because there was nothing to correct. That's exactly what they had done. The room felt tighter now, not physically, emotionally, because now everything was out in the open. No more pretending, no more soft explanations, just the truth. Clear, uncomfortable. I walked slowly toward the window, not turning my back completely, but enough to shift the space, because sometimes stepping away makes people realize what they're losing control of, and I could feel it behind me, the uncertainty, the tension, the realization that this conversation wasn't going the way they planned because I wasn't reacting the way they expected. I wasn't breaking. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't asking for explanations that didn't matter anymore. I turned back toward them, and this time, my voice carried something different, not louder, stronger. You didn't just leave me out of a conversation, I said. You tried to leave me out of a decision that belongs to me. That stayed in the room, heavy, unavoidable, because now it wasn't about what they did. It was about what it meant. And what it meant was something they couldn't soften, or fix it, or explain away. They had crossed a line, and they knew it. The only question now was what they thought was going to happen next, because whatever they had planned didn't include this version of me, and that was about to become their biggest mistake. For a moment, no one moved, not because they didn't want to, because they didn't know how. That kind of silence only happens when something has already shifted, and everyone in the room can feel it. I walked back toward the table, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady, because now I wasn't reacting anymore. I was remembering, and that changed everything. I looked down at the papers again, not to read them, but to see them differently, because this wasn't the first time something felt slightly off. It was just the first time I stopped ignoring it. I rested my hand lightly on the edge of the table, and the memories started coming back. Small at first, almost unnoticeable. Moments that didn't mean anything then, but meant everything now. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Phone calls that ended too quickly. Looks exchanged between them that I chose not to question. Not because I didn't see them, because I trusted them. That trust filled in every gap. It made everything feel normal, even when it wasn't. I lifted my head slowly and looked at my son, then at my daughter-in-law, then my sister, one by one, taking them in, not as they were pretending to be now, but as they had been over time. And suddenly, everything connected. This didn't start tonight, I said quietly. No one interrupted. No one disagreed, because they knew. They knew I had reached that point, that place where everything makes sense, all at once. You've been talking about this, I continued, for a while. Again, silence. But this time it wasn't empty. It was confirmation. My sister shifted slightly. My son looked away. My daughter-in-law tightened her posture. And that was enough, because I wasn't guessing anymore. I was seeing clearly. I took a slow breath and let it out. Not heavy, not emotional, just steady. Every time something felt off, I ignored it, I said. Every time I noticed something didn't quite add up, I let it go. I looked down briefly, then back up. Because I believed in this family, that word stayed in the air. Family. Because that's what this was supposed to be built on. Trust, respect, inclusion. And now, all of that felt different, not broken in one moment, worn down over time, quietly, carefully, without me noticing. I stepped back slightly from the table, not retreating, just creating space to see everything clearly. You didn't just make a decision without me, I said. You built a whole plan while acting like nothing had changed. That hit deeper than anything else. Because it wasn't just about the action, it was about the time behind it, the conversations, the agreement, the quiet understanding between them that I wasn't part of. My son finally spoke, his voice lower now. We didn't know how to tell you. I looked at him, and for the first time, there was something close to honesty in his tone, but it came too late. Then you should have started with the truth, I replied. Simple, direct, because anything else was just avoidance. My sister took a small step forward. We didn't want to hurt you, she said. I nodded once. I understand that. And for a moment, they looked relieved, like maybe that softened things. But it didn't, because I continued. But you did it anyway. That settled everything, because now there was no confusion left, no misunderstanding, just the truth, clear, unavoidable. I folded my arms lightly, not defensive, just grounded, because I wasn't standing there trying to hold on to anything anymore. I was standing there understanding what had already been lost. And once you reach that point, you stop asking why it happened. You start deciding what happens next. And I could feel it now. That shift, not loud, not emotional, just firm. Because whatever they thought this conversation would be, it was no longer that. Not anymore. By then, everything was clear. Not every detail, not every step they planned, but enough. Enough for me to understand exactly where I stood. And, more importantly, where I didn't. I looked at them again, all three of them, standing in the same room, but not on the same side. And that realization didn't come with anger. It came with a decision, because once you see something clearly, you stop waiting for it to change. You decide how you're going to move. I unfolded my arms slowly and placed both hands on the table, grounding myself, not for them, for me, because what I said next needed to come from clarity, not emotion. I'm not going to argue about this, I said. My voice is steady, even. That caught them off guard. They were expecting resistance, emotion, pushback, but I wasn't giving them that. Not anymore. My son stepped forward slightly. We can talk about it, he said. We can figure something out. I shook my head gently. No, I replied. You already figured something out. That stopped him, because there was no way around that. The decision had already been made, without me, and now they were trying to include me after the fact. Not to decide, but to accept. I wasn't going to do that. I stepped back from the table, creating distance, not just physically, mentally, emotionally, because I needed them to understand something. This wasn't just about what they planned, it was about what they assumed. You didn't just leave me out, I said. You removed me from something that belongs to me. My daughter-in-law lowered her arms slightly. Her posture shifted, less defensive now, more uncertain, because the control they thought they had was slipping. We thought it would be easier this way, she said. I looked at her, calm, clear. It was easier, I replied. For you. That landed, because it was the truth they hadn't said out loud. My sister took a small breath. You're making this bigger than it is, she said. And that's when I paused, not because I didn't have a response, because I wanted her to hear it clearly. When I spoke, this is exactly as big as it is, I said. No raised voice, no emotion, just certainty, because minimizing it was part of how they justified it, and I wasn't going to allow that. Not anymore. I picked up one of the papers again, hold it for a second, then placed it back down, exactly where it was. I see what you were planning, I said, and I understand it. That shifted something again, because understanding is not the same as agreeing, and they knew that. My son looked at me carefully now, like he was trying to read what I was about to do. What are you saying? He asked. I met his eyes directly. I'm saying, you don't get to decide this for me. That was it. Simple, final, and in that moment, everything changed. Because now it wasn't about discussion. It wasn't about explanation. It wasn't about them trying to guide the outcome. It was about control, and they no longer had it. The room felt different, not tense, not chaotic, clear, because the line had been drawn, and there was no confusion about where it was. I straightened slightly, not to assert anything, just to stand in what I had already decided. Whatever happens next, I said, it will include me. That stayed in the air, strong, unshaken, because now there was no version of this situation where I stepped back, or stayed quiet, or accepted something that was built without me. That option was gone, and they knew it. The only thing left now was how they were going to respond to a version of me. They clearly didn't expect it. No one spoke right away, because what I had just said didn't leave room for negotiation. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't something they could adjust or reshape. It was a line, clear, unmovable. My son looked at me like he was trying to figure out what had just changed. Not in this situation. In me. Because he had seen me handle things before. Calm, patient, willing to listen, willing to compromise. But this was different. You're not understanding the full situation, he said finally. His voice is steady, but not as confident as before. I held his gaze. I understand enough. That was all I needed to say. Because understanding doesn't require every detail. It requires clarity, and I had that now. My daughter-in-law stepped forward again, trying to regain control. We're trying to protect what we've built, she said. I turned to her. What you've built doesn't give you the right to decide for me. That stopped her. Not because it was loud, because it was direct. There was no space to redirect it, no way to soften it. My sister spoke next, more cautiously now. We're all affected by this. I nodded slightly. Yes, I said, we are. Then I paused, just long enough, And that's exactly why I should have been part of it. That settled into the room, because it closed every gap they were trying to create. There was no version of this where excluding me made sense. Not anymore. I took a step forward, not aggressive, not confrontational, just enough to bring everything back into focus. You sat here, I said, and made decisions about my life, like I wouldn't question it. No one responded, because they knew that part was true. I looked at the papers again, then back at them, and you expected me to accept it after the fact. My son shifted slightly. We were trying to avoid a difficult conversation. I nodded once. And now you have one. That was it. That was the moment everything fully shifted. Because now there was no avoiding it, no delaying it, not controlling it. They were in it, with me, on my terms. And that's when I saw it. Not clearly, not fully, but enough. That realization in their expressions, they hadn't prepared for this version of me. They had prepared for resistance, emotion, maybe even silence, but not clarity, not control, not someone who wasn't reacting, but deciding. I stepped back slightly, not to create distance, but to let the moment settle, because I wasn't here to argue every point. I wasn't here to raise my voice. I was here to make something clear. You don't move forward on this, I said slowly, without me being fully involved. No hesitation, no space for misunderstanding. My daughter-in-law looked at my son. My sister looked between both of them. That same pattern again, looking at each other instead of answering directly. And that told me everything. They were still thinking as a group, still trying to align, still trying to figure out how to respond together. But that group didn't include me anymore. And that was the problem. I let out a slow breath. Then I looked at each of them again, one by one. This doesn't go any further, I said, until everything is on the table. That was the final point. Not raised, not forced, just set. And for the first time since I walked into that room, no one tried to push back. No one tried to explain it away. Because now, they understood something they hadn't before. This wasn't their decision to manage. Not anymore. And whatever they had planned had just been interrupted by the one thing they didn't account for. Me, standing there, fully aware, fully involved, and no longer willing to be left out of anything that belonged to me. For a moment, everything stayed still, not because the conversation was over, because there was nothing left to hide behind. I could see it in their faces, the shift, not dramatic, but real. The confidence they walked into that room with was gone, replaced with something else, uncertainty, because now they weren't controlling the situation anymore. They were responding to it, to me. My son was the first to move, not forward, not closer, just enough to break the stillness. All right, he said, quiet, measured. Then let's put everything on the table. That was the first honest thing anyone had said, not because of the words, because of the tone. There was no strategy behind it, no careful wording, just acceptance. I nodded once, because that's exactly where we needed to be. He reached for the documents, not to hide them, not to move them away, but to turn them toward me, fully. That alone said more than anything else. This wasn't being kept from me anymore. My daughter-in-law adjusted her stance, less guarded now, more exposed, because once everything is out in the open, there's nothing left to protect. My sister stayed quiet, watching, careful, like she understood this moment mattered. And it did, because this was where everything shifted. Not in emotion, in truth. This is about the house, my son said. Simple, direct. I already knew that, but hearing him say it changed something, because now it wasn't implied. It was real, out loud. We've been looking at options, he continued, financially, structurally, long term. I listened, not interrupting, not reacting, just taking it in, because this wasn't about what they had planned anymore. It was about understanding exactly how far they had gone without me. And the decision, he said, pausing briefly, was to sell. There it was, clear, unavoidable, final. I didn't react immediately. I let it sit, because sometimes the truth needs a moment to settle before anything else happens. My daughter-in-law stepped in slightly. We thought it was the best move, she said. For everyone. I looked at her, then back at him, then at the table, and I saw it clearly now. This wasn't just an idea. It was a plan. Research, discussed, agreed on, all without me. I took a slow breath, then spoke. Was. That one word shifted everything. They both looked at me, confused, waiting. I continued. You said the decision was made. My voice is steady, not challenging, just precise. And now it isn't. That landed because it redefined the entire situation. What they thought was final was now open. What they thought was decided was now uncertain, and they could feel it. My son looked at me more carefully now, not trying to lead the conversation anymore, trying to understand it. What are you saying? He asked. I met his eyes, clear, direct. I'm saying nothing moves forward without me agreeing to it. No hesitation, no space to misinterpret it. My daughter-in-law shifted again. You're not even considering it? She asked. I nodded slowly. I am considering it. That caught her off guard, because that wasn't the answer she expected. But I continued. I'm considering everything now. That was the difference. Before, they considered. Without me. Now, I was part of it. Fully, equally, unavoidable. My sister finally spoke again. Soft, careful. That changes things. I looked at her. Yes, I said. It does. Because now, this wasn't their plan anymore. This was a conversation, a real one, with everyone present, with everything visible. And that changed the outcome completely. I stepped back slightly, not retreating, just resetting the space, because I wasn't standing there reacting anymore. I was standing there deciding, and that shift, they could all feel it now. No more quiet planning, no more side conversations, no more decisions made in rooms I wasn't in. That version of this situation was over, and in its place was something they hadn't prepared for. Me, fully aware, fully involved, and no longer willing to let anything move forward without my voice in it. The room felt different after that. Not tense, not quiet in the same way. Clear, because everything that had been hidden was now out in the open. No more guessing. No more assumptions. No more conversations happening without me. I looked at them one last time, not with anger, not with disappointment, just with understanding, because now I knew exactly where I stood, and more importantly, where I didn't. I'm not against discussing this, I said. My voice is steady, grounded, but I'm not going to be removed from something that belongs to me. That was the line. Clear, final, no confusion. My son nodded slowly, not fully agreeing, but acknowledging, because he understood now this wasn't something he could move around anymore. My daughter-in-law didn't say anything, but her posture had changed, less firm, less certain, because the control she thought she had was gone. My sister looked at me quietly, and for the first time, there was something different in her expression. Not defense, not avoidance, awareness, because she knew this moment mattered, not just for what had happened, but for what would happen next. I stepped away from the table, not because I was leaving, because I was done standing in a position where I had to prove anything. I'll be part of every conversation from this point forward, I said, and every decision will be made with me, not around me. No one argued. No one pushed back, because there was nothing left to challenge. The truth had already done the work. I turned slightly, not fully away from them, just enough to shift the space. Because this wasn't an ending built on walking out. This was an ending built on standing firm, on being seen, on being included where I should have been from the beginning. And that kind of ending doesn't need noise. It just needs clarity. I paused for a moment, letting everything settle. The room, the people, the shift that had just taken place, because something important had changed, not the situation itself, but the position I held in it. I wasn't on the outside anymore. I wasn't the last to know. I wasn't the person they could plan around. That version of me was gone, and in its place was someone they now had to face directly, fully, honestly, and without shortcuts. I looked at them one final time, then nodded once. Small, controlled, not approval, acknowledgement, because we all understood something now. This wasn't over. There were still decisions to be made, conversations to be had. But one thing was no longer in question. Nothing would happen without me knowing, without me deciding, without me being exactly where I belonged, at the center of it. And this time, that wasn't something they could change. I keep thinking about that moment, not when I walked in, but when I realized they had already made a decision about my life without me. Because sometimes it's not just what people do, it's what they believe they can do without you ever knowing. So I want to ask you something. If you were in that room and heard everything before they knew you were there, would you have stayed quiet longer or walked in the moment you heard your name? Be honest. I read every comment, and if stories like this speak to you, stories about truth, control, and finding your voice when it matters most, subscribe to Quiet Voice of Her Life, because sometimes the moment you decide to speak changes everything.